Though he wasn't a sheriff, probably no American ever filled the role to protect and serve more consciously or more effectively than our first president, George Washington. He had a reputation as a soldier and later as a statesman, and it's the stuff of legend. But underneath that accomplished career as a military man lay a gentleman of sincere character and stern discipline. I mention him because he illustrates for me in something that's easier for us to understand, a principle. The principle is effective leadership flows from intentional focus on character to deliberate hands and feet actions of practical service. And I think you see it in his life. In fact, he was born in colonial Virginia, the son of a wealthy tobacco farmer, a plantation owner, but his father and his older brother died while he was still quite young. Washington was mentored by William Fairfax, who was a professional surveyor. Washington seemed to be incredibly adept at military and the military service. He joined the ranks of the British Provisional Force in the French and Indian War, and by the time he had completed his service there, he had graduated to a senior officer, something that was a stellar career in a very short period of time. By the time in 1775 they were looking for a commander-in-chief over the Continental Army, it's not a surprise to you to know that they selected George Washington. His accomplishments, those things that he did, they're well known to us. In fact, his accomplishments are important, but they're not a survey of his character. What you might not know is that there are particular statements about what George was like in private. One of them that I find to be personally comforting is one that is found in the pages of his own handwriting. It is a particular document called 110 Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. These were copied down. This was actually originally a Jesuit document from the 16th century, but as a schoolboy, Washington wrote these down at about age 16, and he carried them throughout his life. He reviewed rules of civility. Can you imagine? How many of you wish before people logged on the internet that they would review rules of civility? It's worth reviewing a few of these, so I thought I'd pick them out. There are 110 of them. I'm just going to pick some of the ones that I particularly like. I've updated the language so that you'll understand most of what he's saying. Rule number 1, treat everyone with respect. Rule number 3, don't frighten people. I like that. Rule number 5, if you cough, sneeze, sigh, or yawn, do it privately, not really loudly. Put your handkerchief or your hand before your face and then turn aside. Rule number 6, this it will be specifically for you. Sleep not when others speak. Followed by one for me. When you speak, be concise. I like that. Rule 40, do not argue with your superior. Submit your ideas with humility. Rule 45, when you must give advice or criticism, consider the timing, whether it should be given in public or private, and above all, be gentle in the manner of delivery. Rule 47, do not make fun of things important to others. Rule 50, do not be quick to believe bad reports about others. Rule 56, associate with good people. Listen, it is better to be alone than in bad company. Rule 68, do not go where you are not wanted, and do not give unasked for advice. What a great rule. I think he should write like a whole charter for a church. This is really good stuff. Rule 70, do not correct others when it is not your place to do so. Rule 79, do not be quick to talk about something that you do not have all the facts to speak of. I think it would shut down news organizations. Rule number 110, listen, do not allow yourself to become jaded, cynical, or calloused. See, there are many others, but I found these helpful and sufficient to make the point that behind great men and women of accomplishment are thoughtful and disciplined minds of character. And that's the argument that 1 Timothy 3 made. Last time we looked at the beginning of the text in the first 7 verses. And I know the text was how to choose elders, and the text for today is how to choose deacons. I understand the context, but there's a bigger message that comes through the whole thing. And the bigger message is this: the desire for character must precede the display of competence. We must learn to think and prioritize rightly before we respond rightly. What we accomplish should be an extension of what we know is truly important. Character should precede competence in construction, but it always supersedes accomplishment in importance. Oh, those are too big. Let me say it this way. It matters that we put people in leadership who are people of character, because their accomplishments will be a shadow of the character that's beneath them. That's why we get concerned in elected office when we're putting in somebody whose circle of friends is doubtful in our mind, whose formation of character may lack something we think it should have. Let me say it another way. Whatever we produce in life is of little lasting value if we don't take into account the model we're displaying when we craft it. The greatest leaders are the ones that take into account not just what they're getting done, but when people are looking at their lives, what kind of person is doing it? I don't know if it's making any sense, but let me say this. Accomplishment is in many ways less important than example. The most impacting people in history, the most powerful leaders in history were people that were really game changers over the long haul, not because they left behind a specific product, but because they left behind people. That's our main product. Parents need to remember that it's not just about providing a roof over the head and food on the table. It's they're watching you for what a parent is in how you parent. They're taking their cues from you. Bosses need to understand that there are young people behind you coming up the ranks of the business. If you cheat, they learn to cheat. If you work honestly, they learn honesty. The model we leave behind is part of the goal of accomplishment. The team that we build around us is as important as the goal in front of us. We got to understand that. It's not just what we produce, it's who we're shaping in the process of producing. So that's the message behind verses 1 through 7. That's the reason that character precedes the list for the deacons and the practical servants. Because those who lead you must be people of character, but they also have to then show that character in service. We were not called to be great people of a character in a monastery. We were not called to disconnect ourselves with the rest of the world and have great stellar character that's in theory, because we are never challenged by reality. Paul explained that because the currency of leadership is trust, and we build that trust every day as we lead people. How do you build trust? How do you get in your bank leadership points of trust? Here's how you do it. You serve people. Service banks trust. Trust authorizes leadership. In other words, if I serve you, if I care for you, you trust me. And when you trust me, I can lead you. And if I serve myself, or I serve in a way that harms you, trust is robbed and leadership is diminished. Welcome to America in the 21st century. We don't trust our leaders, do we? Am I speaking out of turn? We don't trust our leaders. Why? Because they don't appear to be serving the ends that matter to us. And that's the bottom line. It's really not about the headline in the news, it's about trust. That's what it's always been about. You can't lead them if they don't trust you. And they don't trust you if you don't show that you care about their needs and understand their world. I need a congressman who knows what a gallon of milk costs and a gallon of gasoline, because they live insulated lives and don't buy what I buy. They don't go where I go. They don't get the health care choice I get. They don't have the same set of problems I have. There are people on their multitude of staffs to do what the rest of us have to do. They don't take their own trash out. They don't even clean up their own mess. No, they really don't clean up their own mess. So the passage that's about the deaconate is all about more than just doing. It's about the conduct of a godly leader. It's about the cause behind a godly leader. It's about the confession that comes out of the mouth of a godly leader. But that godly leader has to be a servant or none of it works. So take a look at chapter 3, verses 8 through 13. Just the first part of this passage. And let's step back and look at the conduct requirement. Now again, he's talking about deacons. The word diakonos is the word servant. It's also the word for waiter in the New Testament. It's the people that wait tables. That's what it is. Deacons likewise must be men of dignity, not double-tongued or addicted to much wine or fond of sordid gain. But holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, these men must also first be tested. Then let them serve as deacons if they are beyond reproach. Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. Deacons must be husbands of only one wife and good managers of their children and their own households. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and a great confidence in faith that is in Christ Jesus. So since both men and women are mentioned in these verses, I'm going to split them in two parts and see if we can't get first to what godly servant men are supposed to be. Take a look at it in verse 8. First, they're supposed to be careful in action. Semnos is the word august. They're supposed to be respectable. They're supposed to be the kind of idea of a servant that has spiritual depth that causes other people to deeply respect the way that they live. Let me be clear. The Sunday school child that's in your class is watching you during the week. If you think you can serve with foul mouth on the construction site and then somehow walk into church and have some new you put on as you come in, you are hindering the work of Jesus Christ. You're neither serving God nor are you leading well. It also says that they're true in word. Dilogos is two words. Duplicitous is what it means. Saying one thing with one person and then another thing with another. In other words, godly servants speak with integrity, with consistency, and with grace. How about the third one? Uncrutched. Not addicted to much wine. This is the word prosecco. It's not the prosecco like the type of wine. It's the word for to attach oneself to cleave to be stuck with. In other words, do you think of them and a bottle? I would be careful if I were you about all of your social Facebook posts having you with a bottle. I would think that in minds of people that you would be aligned as something like that. How about biblical value focused? It's the word not fond of sordid gain. The phrase is found as a compound word. It means eager to gain things in this world, greedy for money. Godly servants don't only look at the temporal value of money in today's terms, but they also see godliness as great gain. They serve to honor God, not to gain from their allegiance and worship. That's not what it's about. People don't know why you're saying what you're saying to them if they think you have an ulterior motive to get something out of their wallet. How about this one? Verse 9, holding to the mystery of the faith. That's grasping deep truths of God. The secret counsels of God that are given to righteous people, which are hidden from ungodly people. See, the Bible makes the argument that there are people in this world who, because of their disbelief in God, do not understand when they open up their Bible what it is. There was a man who was put in a Portuguese prison. True story. He spent years in a prison with only a Bible, and at the end he had determined how many letters were in its pages and what was the middle letter of the Bible. But nothing he wrote gave you any indication that he understood the message of the Bible at all. You can become vastly knowledgeable of the pages of the book and understand nothing of the God that it reflects. And so it's said that a godly leader and a godly servant is one who grasps the deep truths of God. But he also is examined and proven in verse 10. He's first tested, then serves. What happens in the servanthood quality of the church is we find somebody who's a servant-oriented person and we stick them in the job because we need the job done. But the scripture says, hold back, wait, test them. Don't put them in it until they show themselves to a pattern of godliness. Then give them the job. How about intentionally vetted? Before a person becomes a candidate for public office, they smartly vet him. That is, they go through everything he's ever done or she's ever said and make sure there's nothing out there stuck in a closet. Because you don't want it coming out at the last hour, and it will when your opponent finds it out. So the word beyond reproach is not the word unhandled that we saw in 3:2 last time. This is an adjective that cannot be called into account, unreprovable, unaccused, particularly in relationship to being examined or tested. In other words, they give the right answer, and they've shown that they know how to give the right answer. Please don't get the idea in the New Testament that deacons were like leftovers that didn't make the elders. That's not what happened. You pick out Stephen's sermon in Acts and tell me that wasn't deep and rich and biblical and powerful and meaningful. Okay, they killed him for it. But that's what was going on in the persecution. How about in verse 12? Unquestionably faithful. Husband of only one wife. The phrase is the same one used in 3:2, but it's posed in an emphatic style. Let them be absolutely husband of one wife. In other words, I can't send you out to serve if I don't know there might be a romantic reason you're going. I need to be sure that before you're going to walk into that situation, that you're going to be there for the right godly reason. How about this? They're also properly prioritized. See what it says in verse 13? Servants have to be good managers of their children and their own households. You know why it says that? Because we all know what the temptation is. If you're one of the people in this room that has servanthood gifts, you are one of those people that cannot say no. You have had to learn, some of you, and some of you still are learning. You're struggling to say no. Because here's this dear person and they're sharing with you a need and you know how to do it. Now the fact is you're not going to have time to do it without cheating your family. And so he says, find somebody who doesn't cheat their family. Well, that's tough. That's hard. But I have to know where my first ministry is and where my second one is. The most precious ministry you've ever been given is the one right in your home. I can't run around grousing at all the people that live under the roof with me and then come up here and smile at you, because it's going to show up in my kids. It's going to show up in my wife. It's going to show up in my home. It's not that I never do it. It's that I'm wrong when I do. And here's the thing. We've got to understand what the priority is. But there's also the fact that they're a standard bearer. See verse 13? Obtain high standing and great confidence in the faith. This word is a verb to remain over, to reserve, to lay away or purchase. The term high standing is the word to get to a beautiful threshold step. In other words, when they're serving and they're serving as God has called them and they're appointed to serve, it's a beautiful thing. Don't you see that? When somebody's really serving as God would have them serve, it's a beautiful thing to watch. It's more beautiful than a great chorus of voices. That person who grabs that person no one else cares about and tenderly deals with their need because God laid it on their heart to do it is a beautiful thing. One of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life was outside of Amman, Jordan. It was a group of American students who'd come over under the auspices of Franklin Graham and his group. And what they did was wash feet of people and put sandals on their feet. Iraqi refugees that had come from the war had gathered in that place. Now, at the time I was there, they weren't yet Iraqi refugees. They were actually Palestinian refugees. Later on, they went on to do this with thousands of others. But here were people who came, and Christians pulled up a huge container with boxes and boxes and boxes of shoes. Do you know what it looks like to look into somebody's eyes after you wash their cruddy feet and put shoes on them? Do you have any idea how beautiful it is? People would walk and they would stand in line waiting to get their shoes. They'd stand in line like this, but they always left standing like this. Somebody loved them. Somebody washed their feet and put shoes on their feet. By the way, there's not only words about men here, there's also godly women servants. So to be a woman who's a godly servant, but I cannot tell if what he's talking about here is the election of deaconesses or if they are in fact wives of deacons. I don't think it really matters, because to be honest with you, if you happen to be a deaconess because you're a wife of a deacon and the deacon dies, I don't think they fired you. So I don't think that that's the end all and be all. But there are a couple of things that you need to, ladies, pay attention to this. As we're serving, godly servant women have to be careful in action. That is, likewise, be dignified. That's the same word for august, for respectable. That means what you put on, how you speak out, the way you carry yourself, what you laugh at. These are things that should create in the lives of other people who are watching you, and they are watching you, that this is an august and respectable person. Because the ones that serve aren't just the ones who are willing, but if the church does it right, they'll call on the ones who have a certain respectability before they call on them to serve. We got to get out of the mentality, it's a warm body and we have a need. American Express understands that membership has its privileges. We've got to look for the high standing of the high calling of a servant of God. We can do no less for a hurting world. Then verse 11 says, they're also slow to conclude. That's not malicious gossips. Do you know what that word is? Diabolos. It's the word for the devil. The devil is quick to maliciously gossip. And what it says literally is that this is a woman who is not prone to false accusation, not prone to slander, who does not let the emotions of her heart rule her tongue. That's tough. Anybody think that's tough? I think that's tough. She also has to be clear thinking in verse 11. That's the word temperate. Nephalos is the word sober. It means not cloudy in the way she thinks, particularly associated with wine and its immoderate use. It's got to be clear thinking, but also verse 11 says reliable, faithful in all things, as consistent about responsibilities as one could expect, not rash, not impulsive. Now at this point, somebody's sitting there going, okay, I get all this. I understand that that's what deacons are supposed to be. What's that got to do with me? They're not only the standards of who you choose, but the goals we all share. This is the way we're supposed to serve. And when the church fails to serve this way, the world has a cause against us. When we come out and find ourselves to be hucksters looking for money out of wallets, they run around crying that we are somehow more greedy than all the rest of them. We're not. We're just like them, and we shouldn't be. Don't represent Jesus poorly. Better to not represent him at all. But here's what it says. There's something more than a shopping list of details about what you ought to be like. There's a driving passion that comes for a godly servant. Some will serve to be noticed and to be affirmed. That's not godly service. Others will serve in public but be sloppy in private. That's not godly service. There has to be a passion to do what God said and to do it the way God said do it. Look at the words in verse 14. I am writing these things to you, hoping to come to you before long. But in case I am delayed, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth. Look at those last words, the pillar, the upright column that supports the protective covering. And then it says, and support. That's the term for the stone course that supports the roof. In other words, there's a covering over God's people that is supported by people behaving as God told them to behave. Can I make the argument that when churches misbehave and misserve and act badly in their behavior, not according to the word, they tear the roof off the place. They expose all of the parts that are supposed to be covered. They show the world in a way they're not supposed to show the world the ugliness of who we are. Because the church is full of people, and people are full of sin, and sin is ugly. And when we do it the way God told us to do it, there's a covering God places over it. See, one of the things I think that's interesting is, did you notice in verse 14 that there's a standard in God's word for how it's to be done? Did you notice in verse 14 that the standard is that we ought to conduct ourselves, we ought to behave, we ought to act in a specific way? That God cares not just about what our theology is, but what our behavior is. How many of you know somebody who's got great theology but behaves badly? Please don't point. Do you know somebody like that? We were talking the other day, Pastor Todd and I, as we were having the conversation, we were talking about men that we know who are great theologians but bad people. When you separate behavior from theory, you become, of all things, most ugly. Because you have the right answers and the wrong life. People don't care what you know until they know that you care about them. And people don't care what you know about God until they see God at work in your life. So I'm moved when I read verse 14 and 15 that we hold the roof of a protective covering on the tent that we live in. How many of you think the roof's got a few holes in it already? Some of them by people that went in generations before us. The church took stand in the past on stupid things. It did. We got ourselves caught up for, in some cases, 100 years on the wrong issue. Do we all know that? But what we keep saying to the world is, don't look at the church, look at Christ. Okay, that's fine for them, but for us, let's make the church look like Jesus Christ so they can look at us and see Christ. The foundation of the church is the work of God in and through us. That's what it is. The best mirror returns a good image. The flawed mirror returns a bad image. If the bride of Christ would just reflect Christ himself, people would see it. You know, one of the things I've learned about people who stay married for a long time, they start looking like each other. I'm feeling bad for Dottie, but I'm feeling good for me. I'm kind of hoping I catch some of that kind of up laugh line thing that she does. The smile that I wake up in the morning to. There's something more, guys. And you'd be missing the passage if you left with a shopping list and you left with a passionate cause but didn't get the confession. Because I got to tell you, the last part of this, when you first read it, you got to scratch your head and say, why is this here? Paul breaks out into a song. I am not a big musical guy. I'm trying. I'm really trying. But singing in the rain just looks stupid to me, okay? Because I think, get out of the rain, okay? Not the music, well, yeah, the musical, but you know what I'm saying. Sorry, Kelly. All right, I'm in trouble on this wing. I'm going to turn to this wing over here that still likes me. Let me just say this. Paul breaks into one of these musicals. I mean, it's like, by common confession, great is the mystery of godliness, who was revealed in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. And can't you hear Handel's Messiah in the background? It's easy to get caught up in a list of do's and don'ts. It's easy to get caught up in feeling like we ought to have a passion that we're trying to somehow muster up. But when you understand what's underneath of serving Jesus Christ, then the whole thing changes. When you understand who Jesus is, when you get a glimpse of who he is and what he's done for me, then you can get up and you can see it. See, his service saved me. His service restored a crushed relationship between God and man coming out of the Garden of Eden. His service, he came to serve, and his servants changed everything. And when I understand that the basis of servanthood is that God became the servant of man to save mankind, then all of a sudden my service takes on a different confession. Look, to grasp the text, let me just say this. A confession is a unified statement. We don't use this term. We use a confession when you stole the cookie and you got crumbs on you. That's the confession we use. But their idea here is the word something that is spoken by the consent of all. A confession is without controversy, agreed by the mass of them. So say we all. That's the idea of a confession. Look at this one. He says that there are some common things the church ought to believe. He says that the mystery of godliness, that great and private truths have been invested in the family of God. He says that Jesus showed the Father, revealed him in the flesh, and that everything I need to know about God I can see when I look closely at the character of Jesus. He said that Jesus' work was God's plan, not a human device. It's not Jesus grew up in Nazareth and figured out he was Messiah and somehow went out there and tried to figure out how to save man. God had a plan. He says that all heaven gasped at the Father's plan. That's the word seen by angels. Didn't you ever wonder what the angels were doing when God put on human skin? They were guarding Bethlehem. They weren't just singing. That word, tzvaot, is the word for armies. The armies of heaven stood as God poured himself in through the skin of a baby into the womb of a woman and out into Bethlehem. And they stood watch over him because there was a great angelic or demonic host that would desire to stop that plan, and they weren't going to let it happen. But I got to tell you, the whole time they're singing, Gloria, Gloria, they're thinking, what are you doing? I don't understand. Nobody would come up with a plan for God, the infinite, magnificent God, to put on the skin of a baby. What kind of plan is that? Well, it's the kind of a plan that God gave Israel in Joshua. We're going to take Canaan. Great, Josh. What are we going to do? We're going to walk around Jericho. Great. Then what? We're going to come back. All right. What are we going to do after that? Do it again on day 2. Great! Day 3, 4, 5, 6. And by day 7, we got 7 trumpeters walking by on day 7. And we're going to do 7 trips around. By the 4th trip, half the army's gone, look, the walk is nice, but when are we going to attack? That's the kind of God you serve. You serve a God that's not waiting on you to figure out how it's going to work. He's already got that worked out. You know what godliness is? Showing up and letting God work. That's what it is. I get to show up. And the bottom line is, heaven gasped, but the gospel's power is known. He was proclaimed among the nations. Do you see it? He was not only proclaimed among the nations, but the disposition of the Savior is now he's our heavenly contractor. He was taken up into heaven because I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I will come again, receive you unto myself, that where I am you may be also. He's doing a job right now. My point is this. I know the text is about the conduct of deacons. I know we've poured through it, and I know you're saying, wow, he's got 10 minutes. I did it on purpose. There's a couple of observations I want to make before we leave. I'm going to give you 3 of them, and I hope they're helpful to you. First, when we truly serve God by serving people, when we are doing it the way God says we ought to, when we have poured over this and we are doing it as God says we ought to, here's what we do. We show the value system of our heart reflected by the hours we spend in dutiful faithfulness with no strings attached. Men and women, listen to me. We need to guard our hearts. Our world is filled with causes right now, and many of us are in danger of an emotional heart attack. Listen to me. It's diminishing the effectiveness of the Church of Jesus Christ. We follow the wall posts of people on our social networks and on our Facebook pages, and what we'll see are people that are driven more by rage than by love. Amen? How many of you have a friend that's driven by rage? You got at least one rager out there, throwing flame. They float from one injustice to another, projecting anger, like they just woke up to life isn't fair and things aren't just. Then you go down a few posts. Are you with me? You flip down a few posts, now you see puppies. And abused puppies, and you feel bad for the abused puppies. And then the next thing you see a Filipino sitting on a pile of garbage that used to be his house, or somebody from the central part of the United States that's just had their entire life ripped up, and they're sitting there on top of a pile of rubble. And now you're in this heart-wrenching story of a shattered life that the hardships of a broken world have killed. And you are given the incredible task of hitting like or putting a witty comment down. And there's an awful lot of people who honestly believe that liking something is doing something about it. They're spending hours liking, as if that makes any difference in the cosmos. I want to be the person who says that in case you hadn't figured it out, liking something doesn't do anything for the cause. Nothing. That's a cheap substitute for action. We're being overwhelmed by a population that finds itself unable to invest much more emotionally in all of the troubles of people and their injustices, let alone ante up more cash for tragedies. Don't you feel that way? Don't you come out of some of those sessions and go, I can't care about all of this. I'm overwhelmed with the troubles, and I got no cash to send to the Philippines. I'm just trying to get through the month. Am I alone, or does somebody else feel that? Sometimes it feels like the global hurting village is too large a chorus for me to pick out individual voices and really hear them. What we can do, listen to me, what we must do is pick out the call of God for each of us. It's attached to your giftedness. You have gifts. If you know Jesus Christ, you were given along with your salvation the Spirit of God and a package of giftedness, and from that giftedness is a burden in your life, and you are called to that burden. And what you have to do is prioritize that burden ahead of everything else, or you're going to get all of your energy sucked off in injustices that you neither affect nor can you affect. Get as mad as you want at government. They're not listening. Is that not clear to you? Honestly, you could have solved the problem by simply taking the amount of money that was paid for the website and taking care of the people who didn't have insurance this year, and we'd have been fine. Am I the only person that observed that that's how many dollars it would have taken to fix the problem right now? That's how dumb this is. And it's getting dumber. What I want you to understand is your effectiveness will directly increase and your servanthood will increase. We will work at a pet shelter 5 hours a week instead of looking at pictures of abused animals online for the same 5 hours. We'll serve in a soup kitchen 1 day a week instead of reading articles about America's struggling populations and wishing that government would do something to help. We'll look at the buildings and assets of this local church, not as a projection of our own importance. Bigger buildings, more parking lots, we must be more true than the other guy. We'll start looking at these as how can we use every part of what we have to serve the lost community so that they will hear about Jesus Christ. We'll search for the needy who are near us instead of the people who are so far away we can't do anything about them. You don't think there's an elderly person that would love an hour with you? You don't think that we have plenty of people that need food right here in our town? We'll set aside time to work in a children's ministry instead of grousing about why these kids today. We have to beg for people to care for the next generation while they'll spend hours on Facebook trashing the next generation. The Church of Jesus Christ needs to wake up. We're being sucked off in our energies by things that aren't making a difference. Some who are talented will initiate a gathering of like-minded friends and start learning specific worship music and lift other people Sunday after Sunday. They'll just walk up and say to Merlinda, hey, we've got a song. Can we sing it for the congregation? You don't need some committee to pick it out for you and tell you to do it. Do it. Do ministry. Serve people. Some who are deeply wounded in a tragedy like the Philippines or the troubled storm areas of the Midwest. Some of those are going to burn on your heart. So here's my suggestion. Lock arms with 3 or 4 other people who have that same burden and start praying for those people. And when God speaks to you and says, this is what you should do, if it's rolling bandages or raising money, whatever it is, whatever he tells you, that's what you need to do. Don't form a committee and try to solve the problem. You can't. Form a circle, begin in prayer, and let God introduce your part of the solution, which is bigger than you can do. Some people have weathered a personal storm like a divorce or a loss of a loved one. Some of them are sitting right in this room. Do you think you need some kind of program to walk over and put your arm around them and say, let's have lunch this week? My point is that a generation of programmed church events have left the local church people anemic in ministry, unable to serve without some kind of sponsored slot in the bulletin in some room in the building set aside. Why can't a mechanic just look at people and say, one night a week I'm going to just change oil because we know I have a number of ladies that need that done and their wives have left the planet and they don't know what their cars should be done and I'm just going to do that. Why can't one of our nurses walk out and say, you know what, I'm just going to stop by the 3 people that I know that are hurting. By the way, some of this is going on. I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying we're not going to do a big announcement and run a big bulletin thing. Just do it. Godly service isn't about the accolades. Godly service is about doing it. Let me ask a pointed question. I don't want to lean into your face. I want the Spirit of God to speak to you. What's your call in service to the King? What is your call? What gifts have you been given? What are you to accomplish? Some of you are sitting here going, Pastor, I can barely walk. Yeah, but you can pray. And what you don't understand is that the people that can walk fast are walking so fast they're walking prayerlessly. So can you compensate for that for me? The second thing I want you to know is that when we truly serve God by serving people, listen to my heart for a minute. We expose an essential truth that people are of intrinsic value, and we should long to help restore them to a sense of dignity that they've lost through the terrible tragedy they've gone through. When we find somebody slumped over in trouble and despair, we have the opportunity to befriend them. We can get down where they are, sit down with them, not talk down to them, but talk across to them as we're sitting there in the same dirt they're in. We communicate that they're not our project. They're not some stray pet that we pity. This is God's creation. They're made in the image of the Creator. They're a work in progress by a master hand, and we can communicate value into their life by serving them. The weariness they project is a plea for a strong hand to hold. Listen to me. They don't need your hand. They need Jesus' hand, but they're going to grab your hand and you're going to put it in His. And that's how it really works. I'm almost out of time, so let me give you the last one. When we truly serve people and we remind ourselves that the important things in life are found in relationships, not awards. I'm in the room with too many people that leave this life. None of them ask for their trophy case to be brought in. None of them. I've never had anybody say, bring my trophies and make sure they're dusted. I have to tell you, I'd rather make a friend that touches my heart than win a trophy that collects dust on my shelf. And we're living in a time where somehow we have replaced the high confession of Jesus with a desire to have more stuff. Listen to me. I'm not interested in my life being measured by how much you estate sale after I'm gone, because that's what's going to happen to it. I'm going to put all kinds of money in something that my kids are going to see no value in at all. It's going to come in. I'm going to pay $1 and they're going to take 10 cents on the dollar, if that. Why can't we figure that out? What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? The believers have to be the ones who stand up in a society going crazy over stuff. Can you not see this? How fast can we get through Thanksgiving so that we can rush out and shop? Is that not a statement of our time? Because after all, we got no God we're interested in saying thank you to anyway, so it's now become thankful for gorging and football, followed by midnight sales. Who are we kidding? We've gone crazy for stuff, and the Church of Jesus Christ has to be the honest broker of I'll help you because God made you and because God loves you. The message ends in praise because that's the real purpose of it all. Servanthood is about praise. Servanthood is about praise. It's about my ability to love Jesus by loving you, and it's about your ability to love Jesus because you've seen him reflected in me. It's what it is. So I call upon you to do something. Don't scratch your head and walk out the door and go, I wonder what that meant to me. I'll just spell it out. Serve. Not later, now. Not tomorrow, today. Ask yourself the question, what burdens are on my heart? What gifts are in my life? And you'll be surprised that some of you honestly aren't serving because you have allowed a self-image of the deceiver to overwhelm your giftedness. You are gifted. You are an incredible asset. I see it. I wish you could. And I want you to get up and ask Jesus to tell you what to do next.